Today's experience was sent to us by Brother Alex. Stay to the end to understand his experience. My name is Alexander Rivera, and I'm 26 years old. I grew up in New York City, a place that never sleeps, where dreams are made or broken. For most of my life, I lived at 1543 Lexington Avenue, right in the heart of the chaos. Growing up, life was average, I guess. My family wasn't particularly religious, and Sundays weren't about church. They were about sleeping in, catching up on errands, or watching whatever game was on TV. By the time I hit my teenage years, I developed a knack for pushing boundaries. Sneaking out late, running with the wrong crowd, and constantly testing how far I could go without getting caught. It was all part of my routine. At 19, that emptiness became unbearable. I dropped out of college, couldn't hold a steady job, and felt like I was drifting through life with no direction. It was during one of those low points that I met a group of people who seemed to have the answers I was looking for. They were unlike anyone I'd ever known, bold, unapologetic, and fiercely independent. They introduced me to philosophies and practices that rejected traditional ideas of morality and embraced the darker side of human nature. At first, I was skeptical. The idea of Satanism seemed theatrical, like something out of a horror movie. But the more I listened, the more it resonated. They spoke about power, freedom, and the rejection of societal constraints. To someone like me, who felt powerless and aimless, it was intoxicating. Over time, I became fully immersed. I joined their rituals, read their books, and even adopted the symbols they cherished. From the outside, I was still the same guy, Alexander Rivera, the kid from Lexington Avenue with a bit of an edge. But inside, I was someone entirely different. I remember one night vividly. It was late, and I was walking home after a gathering. The streets were quiet, and the air was crisp. I stopped in front of my building, looked up at the city lights, and thought, this is it. This is who I am now. I felt powerful, as though I'd found my place in the world. But in hindsight, I was blind. I didn't realize how lost I truly was, how much I had let pride and bitterness dictate my life. I still remember the first time I attended a ritual. It was in a dimly lit basement on the Lower East Side, the air thick with incense and an unspoken sense of defiance. I was 19, nervous but intrigued. At first, it was the philosophy that drew me in. They didn't talk about worshiping the devil the way people think. It wasn't about bowing down to some horned figure in a red cape. It was about elevating yourself, seeing yourself as your own God. To someone like me, who felt invisible and powerless, that idea was intoxicating. It felt like I was taking control for the first time in my life. I threw myself into it. I read books, attended meetings, and spent hours discussing ideas that rejected the existence of God and mocked the concept of salvation. The rituals became a regular part of my life. Other times, it was more elaborate, with symbols and chants that I didn't fully understand but felt powerful nonetheless. There was something thrilling about the secrecy, the rebellion. It made me feel like I belonged to something bigger than myself. But there were darker moments, too. I remember one night vividly. It was late, and a group of us had gathered at a park after one of our meetings. Someone brought up the idea of testing limits, seeing how far we could push the boundaries of morality. We ended up vandalizing a church nearby, spray painting its walls with symbols and phrases meant to provoke. At the time, it felt exhilarating, like we were proving a point, taking a stand. But even then, there was a flicker of doubt in me, a quiet voice asking, "Why are you doing this?" On the surface, I played the part well. I was confident, even smug. But deep down, there was always a void, a sense that something wasn't quite right. I tried to fill it with the rituals, the philosophies, the rebellious lifestyle. The truth was that I wasn't in control at all. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that were forming, the moments when I could have turned back but didn't. At the time, I thought I was free, but I was more trapped than I'd ever been. It was a cold January evening. That night, I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I'd had a fight earlier in the day with a friend, something stupid but heated. I wasn't in the mood to apologize or reflect. I just wanted to be alone, and for a moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. I leaned against the ledge, the rough concrete cool against my back, and took a long drag of my cigarette. The air felt heavier than usual, and I remember shivering, not just from the cold but from something I couldn't quite put into words. It was like a shadow had settled over me. Then it happened. I shifted my weight to turn and lost my footing. It was so sudden. One moment I was standing there, and the next I was falling. My heart leapt into my throat as my hands scrambled for something, anything, to grab onto, but there was nothing. Time slowed as I fell, the icy wind whipping past me, the ground rushing up to meet me. In those seconds, every shred of confidence I'd ever had evaporated. I wasn't powerful. I wasn't in control. I wasn't anything. Fear consumed me, real, raw fear unlike anything I'd ever felt before. The city blurred around me, a swirl of lights and shadows, and then, nothing. When I hit the ground, there was no sound, no pain, no sense of impact. Just a sudden, overwhelming darkness that swallowed me whole. And then, slowly, I became aware of something else. A faint, distant hum, like the echo of a voice I couldn't quite make out. But before I could focus on it, the world shifted again, and everything I thought I knew about life and death began to unravel. "His vitals are dropping," a voice shouted. I tried to move, to speak, but nothing worked. My body felt like it wasn't mine anymore. It was as though I was trapped inside, helpless and disconnected. I caught glimpses of faces, doctors and nurses. It wasn't long before everything began to fade again. The voices around me became muffled, like they were underwater. The beeping of the machines slowed, and the light above me dimmed. "He's crashing," someone yelled. I felt my chest tighten as if something was pulling me from the inside. The pain peaked, sharp and unbearable, before suddenly vanishing. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the chaos of the hospital room dissolved into silence. I floated above the scene, watching as the medical team worked frantically to save me. My body lay motionless on the bed, pale and battered, wires and tubes everywhere. I should have felt something, fear, sadness, anger, but instead there was a strange sense of detachment, like I was observing someone else's life. It was surreal, watching them fight so hard for a body that I was no longer connected to. And then, just as suddenly as I'd left, I was pulled away. The hospital room vanished, replaced by something I couldn't yet understand. Darkness surrounded me at first, vast and endless, but it wasn't empty. I could feel a presence, something powerful and ancient. There was no pain, no sound, just a deep, unsettling awareness. And then, a faint light appeared in the distance. It felt as though I had stepped beyond the boundary of life, crossing into a place where the rules I had lived by no longer applied. Whatever was ahead, I knew instinctively that it was more real than anything I had ever known. As I moved toward the faint light, it grew brighter, enveloping everything around me. In the middle of this brilliance stood a figure, tall, majestic, and radiating a presence that was both overwhelming and comforting. It was an angel, though not like the soft, serene images I'd seen in paintings. "Alexander," the angel said, its voice calm but commanding. "Your time has not yet come, but you must see the truth." I didn't speak, I couldn't. Words failed me as I stood there, utterly exposed. Without a word, the scene changed. The light around me dimmed, replaced by a choking darkness. The air grew heavy, hot, and suffocating. I was standing in a place I can only describe as hell. It wasn't the fiery pit I'd mocked in life, but it was far worse, a realm of endless despair and torment. I could hear the screams before I saw their source, desperate and agonized cries that seemed to echo endlessly. Shapes emerged from the shadows, figures writhing in pain, clawing at nothing, their faces twisted in fear and regret. The darkness wasn't just around them, it was inside them, consuming them from within. As I looked closer, I recognized some of them, faces from my past. People I had known in the circles I ran in, those who had shared my beliefs, my defiance. One of them turned to me, their hollow eyes meeting mine. "Don't come here," they pleaded, their voice raw with despair. "Turn back while you can. This isn't what we thought it would be." The sight was unbearable, not just because of their suffering but because I understood in that moment how my own choices had led me down the same path. The angel's voice broke through the horror. "This is the fate of those who reject the light," it said. "You have lived in rebellion, but you have been given a chance to see the truth." I wanted to look away, to deny what I was seeing, but I couldn't. The weight of it all pressed down on me, the reality of the torment, the inescapable consequences of a life lived in defiance of the truth. The vision of hell faded, I was back in the radiant light, but this time I wasn't alone. Before me stood a figure clothed in brilliance, a presence so powerful yet so gentle that I knew immediately who it was: Jesus. His face was not entirely visible, but his presence spoke volumes. It was as though every part of him radiated love, compassion. "Alexander," he said, his voice soft but filled with authority. "I have been watching you, waiting for you." I couldn't look him in the eye. The weight of my life, my choices, and my rebellion pressed down on me. I felt unworthy to even stand in his presence. My knees buckled, and I found myself on the ground, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I didn't believe in you. I rejected you. I lived my life against everything you stand for." There was no anger in his response, no condemnation, only overwhelming sense of love. "I know," he said gently, "and yet I have never stopped loving you. You were lost, but I am here to bring you back." His words pierced me, not with pain, but with a clarity I had never felt before. All the lies I had believed, all the arrogance I had clung to, crumbled in the face of his truth. "My grace is sufficient for you," he said. "Your life was meant for more than what you've known. I am giving you a second chance, not because you deserve it, but because I love you. Go back, Alexander. Share what you have seen. Change your ways. Live for the truth." I nodded, still overwhelmed by his mercy. I wanted to stay in that light forever, but I felt myself being pulled away. His final words echoed in my mind: "I have called you by name. You are mine." In an instant, I was back in my body, gasping for air as the beeping of machines filled the hospital room. My chest ached, my head throbbed, but none of it mattered. I had been given a second chance, and I knew my life would never be the same again. When I finally left the hospital, I knew there was no going back. It wasn't easy. The pull of my past, the rituals, the pride, the rebellion, was still there, lurking in the background. But it felt foreign now, like something that didn't belong to me anymore. Believers must always be bold in confessing Jesus Christ as their Lord and personal Savior. Jesus is the truth and the light. God bless you all.